He was a young Dallas Times Herald reporter who sprinted from his newspaper desk to Dealey Plaza minutes after shots were fired at President John F. Kennedy. He is a professor emeritus of communications at Southern Methodist University. In addition to Behind the Scenes covering the JFK assassination, he is the author of numerous books, including Indomitable Sarah, The Life of Judge Sarah T. Hughes, Big D, Triumphs and Troubles of an American Supercity in the 20th Century, and Dallas, An Illustrated History. Please join me tonight in offering a warm welcome to Darwin Payne.
So anyway, thanks. I want to tell you a little bit about my book, and then tell you and show you some pictures. In fact, that's me on the right-hand side. And of course, I had a part in choosing the pictures, so naturally I'm not in the country. And it occurs about an hour and a half after the assassination, when I went to the Dealey Plaza from the Times Herald, where I was on the rewrite desk for that day. So that was, I'm interviewing a detective, Marvin Thomas, I think is his name, and who had been up through the 6th floor and had found some things that belonged to Oswald. And the thing he has in his hand right there in the bottle is something that somebody earlier had eaten, not Oswald, but somebody else. So he thought he was bringing goods from Oswald. And the next person with that long big sack that you've seen, he did have the rifle that had been disassembled, but he had assembled it for the shot. Now, let me just say a couple more things about growing up near here. One thing I remember especially, the Dallas Symphony Orchestra played once a year, maybe twice a year, free for students. And I remember one year, I must have been in the 3rd grade, 4th, I forget now, but we all came, and after the performance, which wasn't here, it was in the music hall, we were encouraged by our teachers to go backstage and congratulate the musicians and get autographs from the conductor and the first violinist. And so I did, and we didn't go as a group, but I did as an individual, and I forget whose autograph I got, but then I came out, and gosh, where were my classmates? The class was gone. I was lost here on Ferry Park, but I knew Ferry Park pretty well. And in those days, you rode a streetcar, and that's how we would get along so often. It cost 3 cents. Well, I happened to have 3 cents. I thought, well, why worry? I'll just go catch a streetcar and go back to school, which was down 7th Avenue. So I did that, and they hadn't even missed me. Now these days, you wouldn't see that happening, but when you were younger, in that time, I think you had a lot freer time to wander about, and your parents felt very safe for you. Let's see if I can, where's my clicker for, what do we do with that? I got my pocket. Oh, my pocket. Let's see what I get. There we go. Now, okay, this, of course, I wanted to write a book quickly after the assassination. And the truth is, I started on this book at that time. But so many people, I was 26 years old at the time of the assassination, and many of the reporters, like the outsiders who came in, and others who started writing books too. So I sort of gave up after about 120 pages, thinking that, I couldn't compete with those people, the others. And so I saved all my notes, but I kept up with everything. And, all the news about the assassination. And thereafter, every year, every 10th year, let's say the 10th anniversary, 20th, 30th, I would think, well, I would have get to work on that book and have it ready. 30th came, 40th, 50th, and this year the 60th. That's got to be it, I thought, because 60 years after the assassination, there won't be many people who would be interested in it. But so it came out this year. And of course I still have the 2 notebooks that I used in collecting data at the time, being at the scene. I was being at the important scenes. And those were used as a basis for this. But of course that wouldn't be enough information. The scenes where I was, like at Dealey Plaza here, I mean, I had a lot of notes from the people that I interviewed. But I also, as the years went by, many books had been written. A lot of people who were there and witnessed it. The interviews by the Warren Commission of people who were sworn to testify the truth. And I researched all those things that I had my few notes on. So you'll see in the book my recollections, and then based on with background information, which gave it a lot more heft, really. And in the back, there are footnotes at the bottom of the pages or at the end of the paragraphs, and I go into those footnotes at the end with a lot more personal data. So if you happen to have this book, and I'm going to be selling some after this, take a look at those. It's pretty interesting, I think, telling about how I'll try to hold it steady, about how I got the information or personal things that happened. And then, of course, I have the sources that I use to back up the things that I said. So it's a lot more than what I saw and did, although there's a lot of that, and a lot of the best part, I think, would be there. So here we go with the cover. Let's see if I can get this mic. I want to turn to the picture a little bit, but also be okay. Am I okay back here? You think? Okay. This, of course, well, let's start just before this. Well, I'll even go earlier. The very first president to come to Dallas was Theodore Roosevelt. And here was the morning news on that morning, which I got from the morning news, just as an example of how Dallas had always treated presidents as they came in. And the Teddy Roosevelt, they wanted in the city to give a like an 8-horse carriage ride, 8 horses pulling the carriage. He didn't want that. He only wanted, I think it was 4. And so he went down to 4. They gave him a ride through the streets of Dallas. Population then about 60,000, and had a big celebration for him. He was on his way to San Antonio, where he had led the Rough Riders, but he did stop here and spend the night. The next president, William Howard Taft, came, followed him, and by the time he came, maybe 1909, 10, automobiles were here. So they gave him an automobile ride through the streets of Dallas, the same streets, basically, that Theodore Roosevelt went on. Now, I first saw, well, the only time I saw Kennedy, really, was in 1960 when he was running for president. And that was in Fort Worth. My first job as a reporter was at the Fort Worth Press, the tabloid newspaper, with a little bit of a sensational touch to it, wanting to go strong for angles and find the interesting thing about that story. Well, I was very eager to get to see the president for the first time in my life there. And I was not, when I went into the office, the city editor, Delbert Willis, said, well, no, you don't have anything today, but he said, I'm going to give you a press pass to ride on the press bus going from Fort Worth to Dallas. So I got a ride I stayed in the office. No, I didn't stay in the office, that's another time. But I came out to see him speak at Breckenridge Park, I think it is, in Fort Worth. And then he came to Dallas, and I was on the press bus following him to Dallas. Here's when Kennedy is speaking at Grand Prairie at Timco, at LTV, I think it was. And you can see in the picture Kennedy at the microphone, and there you see LBJ, and then you see Sarah T. Hughes, who was a co-director Mercury's campaign in Dallas. And then there's Barefoot Sanders, who was the U.S. District Attorney in Dallas, all together. And he's speaking at Grand Prairie. Huge crowd came out from the airplane industry, from those manufacturing plants, and enjoyed his speech. And the night before was the night that he'd been in Houston. You might remember that he had to appear before Protestant ministers. They were worried about him being a Catholic. And so one of the persons in the crowd at the park in Fort Worth had a sign, "One Baptist for Kennedy." And I didn't get that picture in, but it's a good picture. Now here, this is the Dallas Times Herald on the Thursday before the Friday. And this gives you the tour for the automobile tour, the limousine tour. You'll notice that it starts at Luffield, goes down Cedar Springs, or Lemon. Cedar Springs all the way back, I think. Came down Lemon Street, and Terry Creek into downtown Dallas, came down, hit Main Street, and came down Main Street and turned right there at Elm, and then into the Dealey Plaza. That was his route, and that's where Oswald had his job, of course, at the Texas School of Depository. And so the day before, he saw that the president was coming right by the building. And of course, Oswald, as I suspect all of you know, had been a declared Marxist. I mean, he was a Marxist from the age of 15 until his death. He vowed that he was a Marxist. And got in touch a lot with the Communist Party, some. Not enough to make a difference. They didn't want to do anything with it, the truth is, because he was young and naive, I suppose. Of course, he later lived in Soviet Union for about 2.5 years. But anyway, it seems to me, this being the first map, they'd only chosen this route about 5 days before the visit. The head of the Secret Service here, Forrest Sorrells, police chief, and others had prepared this route for him. And at first it was going to be at the Women's Building right here at Fair Park. But they thought the security would be difficult here. And so they decided to go to the Trade Mart instead. And so here's the paper that Oswald, and he did read newspapers a lot, could see that. And his wife now, you remember that he married in the Soviet Union, Marina Oswald. And they were separated now. She wanted a divorce. He could be nice, but he was pretty rough on her any number of times, really. And she wanted out of it. And liked being over here, though. But he was wanting her to come back to him and wanting to, he said, let's have a natural life and I'll be good. I'll get you. And he went this Thursday, when the day this map came out, he went, he caught a ride with somebody he knew to go out to Irving, where Marina was staying with a friend who was trying to learn Russian. And so he went there, and that night, according to Marina's testimony, he told her he wanted to come back as a family. They had 2 children now. The youngest about 1 month old, and the oldest like at 3, perhaps 2, nearly 3. And he said, I'll buy the washing machine. He didn't have much money ever, but he said, I'll buy the washing machine. And begged her to come back. She refused to come back to him because she still wanted a divorce. But he spent the night there, as he had been doing previously, on every Friday night. But this, he knew the president was coming the next day on Friday, so he went out on Thursday to ask her, because he had a rifle and all that in mind. We just have to surmise. And she refused. The next morning, the morning of the assassination, he took off his wedding ring, put it on the dresser, put it in a favorite cup of hers, a very fancy cup. I don't know what kind it was really. And took out $170 and left it on the bureau there in the bedroom, leaving himself $13 and something. And so he left and went to the garage where the rifle had been hidden in this early woman's garage, Bruce Payne. And he got the rifle, put it in that big sack that you see, and we'll see a picture of it later, and came downtown to this job at Dealey Plaza, where the Texas Scuba Depository was, and where the Sixth Floor Museum now is. Now, of course, Dallas was fearful about this visit because so many ultra right-wing groups had opposed Kennedy, had opposed the Democrats, and thought they were communist influenced and ready to turn the government over to communists. And like this is Welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas. That was a full-page ad that appeared in the Dallas Morning News on the day of the arrival. And so it looked like those ultra-right-wingers in this instance were going to have their way and no telling what they would do. They had a lot of police officers present because of the various incidents that had appeared before, that had occurred before. And that one, the person whose name is on it, Bernard Weissman, was somebody new to Dallas. He wanted to get involved with some of the right-wing politicians. And he waited until the offices for the morning news and the hour for which you could place advertisements had come to nearly to the end, and he showed up right at the end and had that ad that was prepared, and it appeared in the newspaper that day. So when JFK was flying over from Fort Worth with his wife Jackie, he said, "We're entering nut country now," referring to this sort of activity that occurred, and the fact that Dallas was so fearful of what might happen, and so much had happened since that Adlai Stevenson speech, which was very difficult. But now, the tension was so great about what might happen that they planned. John Connally was involved in this. He was a Democrat, and the president asked him to go to Dallas and see what he could do to straighten this thing out. So they declared that on the visit to Texas, they would have political and non-political visits. The visit to Dallas would be non-political. That is to say, the Democrats would have nothing to do with it, nothing especially in planning it. It would be the Dallas Citizens Council, and you know of the Citizens Council. And then the Fort Worth visit would also be non-political. And the other three towns, you'd have San Antonio, Houston, and Austin would be political. So you wouldn't have the political parties involved in the reception in Dallas. And so, of course, the Democrats were very upset about that. And gosh, he's our president, they thought. And so I think Kennedy and Jackie expected a lot of trouble when they landed at left field because so much had occurred before. But the truth is, they had a wonderful reception. I think it was mainly the Democrats, since they were basically turned out of the luncheon that was going to be held. They had some seats, but they weren't running the show. The Democrats went to left field to give this great greeting to Jackie in her suit that we all remember, pink or raspberry, I think they later decided to call it, raspberry suit. And there's been people, mainly I think, were the Democrats who went there to show them what a wonderful day they were going to have, what they hoped they were going to have. And at the end of this visit, let's see if there's another picture there. Well, that's like a few minutes later. There was a reporter for Newsweek who asked Jackie, who definitely did not like politicking, and she had her second baby not long before. He asked, "What do you think about politics now?" And Jackie said, "It's wonderful, it's wonderful." Sort of changed her mind with that greeting. Then they got in their cars, took the trip along that route that I showed you, and came to Dealey Plaza, That's when the shots were fired, of course, by Oswald. 3 shots. And that terrified the crowd that was at Dealey Plaza. And I was at the paper, the Times Herald, and I did not have a role in covering Kennedy, but my job was to write a sidebar story about Jackie and what she was wearing, what the crowd was doing with her, what she did, and so I was concerned about that. But we had to do a big rewrite. You had to have rewrite people because the reporters would be out in the field. Our deadline normally was at about 11:30. Well, they were only arriving at 11:30 or a little bit later. And so the deadline was held back to 12:30. You had to have reporters in the field seeing what was happening. And this one was, Val Hill was the reporter. It was calling me on the phone, describing the incidents, not yet, the crowd at Dealey Plaza. And it was during that time, we're on the city desk listening to the parade route as the police dispatcher was telling the route. And suddenly the city editor, Ken Smart, says, he's been hit, repeating what the dispatcher said. They're sending ambulance and homicide units code 3, sirens and lights going to Dealey Plaza. Or actually said the triple underpass, thinking it was a triple underpass rather than Dealey Plaza. When we got there, it's all Dealey Plaza. And so my lead, I've been having trouble writing that story with Jackie, about Jackie. And so the city editor said, Darwin, go to Dealey Plaza. And because the shots had been fired there. So I put up my notepad and ran from the Times Herald, which was about 5 blocks away, to Dealey Plaza. So I got there about, I would say, 15 minutes after the shots were fired. And I estimated in the first version of this book that it probably took me maybe 15 minutes to get there. But then, about a year ago, as I was working at this book, my wife and I came to town on a Sunday morning, and I said, I want to try that out again and see. And the Times Herald building was gone, but I knew exactly where it was. And so, let me try to duplicate my pace on that day, even though I'm how many years old? 60 years old, or 59 it would have been, and see how long it took me. So the one who had gone with me was Paul Rosenfield, an older gentleman, and we walked and we'd run as much as we could, walk a little bit, especially for Paul's sake, run some more. And so I tried the best I could to duplicate that, and it took only about 8 minutes to get there on that run. So I was pleased at that. So when we got there, this was the scene. Other officers, there's another picture of officers with rifles looking up into the Scuba Depository, because that's where most people thought the shots had come from. Indeed, had come from there. And I saw police officers with shotguns, pistols, other weapons. A fire truck was already there with a huge hook and ladder, and looking around, and the people were just shocked. And there were people milling about, talking to one another in tears, many people in tears, of course, as you can imagine, or crying. And I went to the building itself and tried to get in, but they'd already shut it down. Actually, about 3 reporters had already gained entrance before they managed to shut the door, and they stayed in a little while. But so then I looked for some spectators again and found 3 or 4 women who were crying the most, I would say, which indicated to me they'd seen the most, because most people couldn't tell what had happened. They hadn't been close enough, because after all, you had the image of Jackie, the shots being fired, Jackie crawling to the back of the limousine, and where was she going? Nobody knew. How many shots had hit the president? Nobody knew for sure. But these women that I saw and who were close to it told me, said, well, our boss saw it. And that would be Abraham Zapruder, the one who had the film of it. And I said, well, can I I go see him? Or take me to him? Sure, come in. And he was in the next building across the street from the school repository. I think they call it the Dow Tex building. And maybe still do. And that's where Zapruder was. So I went up there with them to their office, Zapruder's office, and meet him there. He came back just a few minutes later, in tears for sure, with his camera. And we were all watching Walter Cronkite on TV. And Walter was talking about what had happened, but he didn't know what kind of condition the president was in. They didn't know, how serious it was for sure. But Zapruder was looking at the TV, and I watched TV with him over that next 45 minutes. And he was, Mark was crying really, and he was shouting at Cronkite, "No, he's dead. I know he's dead." I saw it hit him. I saw it in the back of his head explode like a firecracker. And a very vivid thing, which I had in my notes, and I got a little longer quote than that in the book. But we kept watching, and finally, I was trying to get his camera, not to get it, but to get him to go with me to the paper to develop the film on the camera, because he thought he had a good shot. He was up on one of those pedestals at Dealey Plaza, that's elevated at the sides. And he was right near the building when they passed by. When you see these pictures. And but he did not want to go with me to the paper. He wanted to turn it over to the Secret Service or the FBI. Sort of shows that he knew quite a bit about the visit, knowing that I was not the police in charge for this. It's going to be the Secret Service. They're the ones who protect the president. Finally, I failed to persuade him to do that. I called the paper and told, I had a rewrite person then. I was telling things I was seeing to the rewrite person, Bill Bates. I said, maybe you should get some executive in a good position who can talk to Zapruder and see about getting him. So he did. He got Jim Chambers, who was the president of the paper. Then Chambers came on the line. I was on the line on one end. And I told him what I thought. I'd never met Chambers, but I was telling him what I thought we ought to do, which was to send the Times Herald card down here with Times Herald on the side, and somebody like you with it, and bring Zapruder with his film and try to develop the film here and see whether it's good or not. And we thought that it would be. But Zapruder was saying no. He wanted to give it only to the Secret Service or FBI. So that didn't work. I later found out from Chambers. It's one of those things I later learned as I did more research in my own notes at the scene, that morning Kennedy had called him in Fort Worth and said, "Can you get me some Macanudo cigars? They don't have any here in Fort Worth." And so Chambers had gone to a cigar store here in Dallas. I guess they had a store that specialized in cigars here. And bought 6 Macanudo cigars. Not that I know anything about Macanudo cigars. And they were made in Cuba, that we know. And so Chambers had it in his pocket. Was ready to give them to Kennedy at the luncheon, which of course didn't occur. Let's see here. There's the officer, and there were plenty of officers. There's the way it used to be when people read newspapers. This was that Love Field. You can see at the bottom, customers at Love Field are buying copies of the paper. President dead at the Times Herald, first headline. They're all crowded around. Now I bet out of this crowd of maybe 60 or 80 people, probably, but you're a more educated group. I was going to say more, in a group this size normally you'd only find maybe 10 who take the paper, wouldn't you think? On my street there were about 2 people who take the Dallas Morning News. So the newspapers virtually disappeared. And then after Zapruder, at the end of my visit with Zapruder, in came Forrest Sorrells, head of the Secret Service, with a reporter from the Dallas Morning News, who was Harry McCormick. an old veteran reporter, and a third person, I didn't know who he was. They asked the group, they took the group into an office to talk to him, and I saw that the other person was Harry McCormick, a veteran reporter for the Dallas Morning News. And I didn't know him, but I'd seen him and knew who he was. He went in because he'd been with him. And so I went in too. No, this is a private business meeting. And I said, wait a minute, there's Harry McCormick, reporter for the Dallas Morning News. If he's going to be in here, I've got to be here too. I'm with the Times Herald. So they kicked McCormick out. But he did okay. He later worked with him when they did have him developed at Kodak. Let's see. And then I went back to the school depository, having finished with that. And that's when this happened. This is the sack that Oswald had brought the rifle to work with. That's when the person gave the rifle. That's what is in that big sack. He said window curtains, which wasn't true, of course. And there's Joe Sherman with a cigarette, who was another reporter for the Times Herald. That's me on the right, where you can just see my face with my notebook, one which I still have at home. It's up for sale if anybody wants it. And then this is on the 6th floor. This would have been about 2 o'clock on the day of the assassination, when about 10 reporters, and this is me on the far left, and this is the 6th floor window where Oswald was, and where they found the boxes that he had stacked up, book boxes, where he could brace himself to fire the shots. And the reason I think had been that all the foreign press, not foreign, but other cities, reporters were here and wanting to get information, doing everything they could. And Dallas wanted to look cooperative with them. And the city manager, Elgin Crow, told the police chief, Jesse Carey, let's cooperate with the press. So I think it was at that time they decided to let some of the press go into the 6th floor. And so I was in that group that got to go to the 6th floor. They're preserving that area very well with the 6th floor museum now, because they've got it glassed off, the glass wall, and you can't really see the window. But we could, and we were just ready to look out that window, and you could see in the next shot, that's the view that the sniper, Oswald, I'm sure, had, looking at this window and propping the rifle on that box. I just read in one report the other day that you could sort of see the outline of the bottom of the rifle on that box he used to press it so hard. But anyway, there it is. At that time, they only got a suspect arrested. Many of the reporters had left already. There were just a few of us there to go up to the 6th floor. The reason was that the police officer had been shot and killed, Tippett, in Oak Cliff. And I remember John Shokoff, one of the reporters at the time, came over to the school depository where several of us were, and said a policeman has been shot in Oak Cliff. One of us ought to go over there. And I didn't want to go over there because I thought there would be a group of men, maybe 3 or 4, hidden away in a little hiding place up in the building, and that they would be found by the police eventually, and there'd be a shootout. I wanted to see it or be close to it when that happened. But Shokoff decided none of us wanted to go. But Shokoff went over and saw the body of J.D. Tippett, where Oswald had shot him. Oswald had returned to the rooming house at 1026 North Beckley, where he had a room. And he got his pistol, and he got a jacket on, and Early Roberts, the housekeeper there, said, "Now you sure in a hurry," not knowing that the assassination had occurred, and certainly not that Oswald knew anything about it. And he said nothing. to her, but he never did, she said, never talked anyway. That's the sort of person he was there. And so he had the pistol, and on the way, somehow it's sort of inexplicable as to how Oswald could get down from the 6th floor to the ground floor and escape when there were so many people down there who had seen the shots and all. I believe it was Oswald, of course, but he did get down in a big hurry. And when he got to the so-called lunchroom there's a police officer there with the superintendent of the building, Roy Truman, and there he saw Oswald, not with a weapon or anything, but just walking back, and he said, "Who are you?" And he asked Truman, and Truman said, "Oh, he works here." And that was Oswald. And Oswald just left. They didn't ask him for anything else. I mean, that was just the feeling that nobody at work would do that. And so Oswald, this is little known, but he seemed very relaxed in the school depository about people who saw him. Pierce Alvin being one person, Kent Biffle being another, and he looked natural to them. He looked natural to Marion Baker, the police officer, who wondered who he was, and had a pistol out, actually pointed at him when he asked that question. He ran down, must have been down Main Street, maybe Elm Street, hopped on a bus, and there on that bus was a woman that he had spent a few days at her rooming house down, I think, on Marsalis, after he came back from Mexico. You remember, maybe that he went to Mexico trying to get a trip to Cuba, get a visa to go to Cuba, because he wanted to show Castro how to really run a communist operations. Because after all, he lived in the Soviet Union for 2.5 years. But he didn't like it, by the way, because there were too many obstacles just to be there. You know, they were always checking on you and that sort of thing. And this woman declared him, when she saw him, and she didn't want him to see her, because she had declined to let him stay at her rooming house, and she was suspicious of him. She didn't like him for some reason. And she said he looked like a maniac. He looked idiotic. He was all distressed on that bus. She was the only person. She tried for him not to see her. She made an effort and didn't think he saw her. But other people who saw him thought he was pretty average looking. But that was a very interesting description of him by her. Mrs. Metzger, I think was her name. And from there, of course, Oswald heads towards Jefferson Boulevard, that part of Oak Cliff. And after shooting Tippett, who had come into the car, nobody knows why, except there had been a brief description of Oswald let out, but it wasn't a very careful description. They didn't know exactly what he looked like. And so Oswald kept going and got on Jefferson Boulevard. People saw him and he looked mysterious because he was going in and out of these little inlets at those stores, many stores on Jefferson. You may have noticed those little walk-ins. He would be ducking in one of those, fearing that somebody was watching, police for instance. He'd go to another, duck in another. And they finally spotted him in the Texas Theater. He went in the Texas Theater. And there, the ticket taker was away from the window at the moment, so he just went in without a ticket. And our friend Hugh Edwards, who died just a couple of weeks ago, was one of the reporters who was going that way trying to find him. Hugh went into the Texas Theater, went into the balcony, and saw the capture, was the only reporter to see Oswald captured by the police, who went in and caught him and took him to the police station. There we are at work at the Times Herald. We were very busy. I was away from the paper, but this photographer took this. How are we doing on time? Not bad, I guess. Ken Smart was sitting there, the city editor who's second to Dealey Plaza. Al Willis, the managing editor, behind him. To the copy desk people over to the left. And Stan Weinberg, it doesn't matter, but they were all gathered around the desk and working hard on the story. Now this is Felix McKnight. The Times Herald had recruited him from the Dallas Morning News, where he was a famous reporter and had a good time there, maybe managing editor. The Times Herald persuaded him to come to the paper and take the title of executive editor or something like that. So Felix normally didn't do any stories for us because he had that high position. But you know, this day he's at the typewriter trying to knock out whatever information's coming in. And then to the left, to the far left, is a good friend of mine now, Bill Sloan, who was a copy desk person, always on the copy desk, editing copy, writing headlines. And then another, I think Charlie Stone was his name. There's Jim Newell, a police reporter for the Morning News, who was talking to the officer, M.N. McDowell, who was closest to Oswald, and wrestled him down to arrest him. There were several officers there, but McDowell were closest. And McDowell later on signed a picture of himself for me, and he had a scratch. Let's see if you can see the scratch. Well, down the side of his face, you can't see it there, where Oswald had a pistol, his pistol, and sort of slashed him. There's 1026 Beckley. This is where Oswald had a room. And that's where I went that afternoon, the 22nd. It was getting dark, and I was able to interview about 16 people who had rooms there. Normally were people like Oswald working on minuscule jobs, really, and just taking a room at a very cheap price. Oswald was paying, what does it say, $8? Well, it was $8 a week for him. And so he just walked there, having been rejected by the other woman that I told you about, who was on the bus. So he came there and found that one and took the room. And the police, the FBI, district attorney's office had already been to his room by then when I got there. But I got to go in his room, and it was bare of everything. It was just a little room off to that side of the building. He couldn't get out of the building from there, the house. And one of the later things I learned too, the grandmother or the granddaughter of the woman and man who owned this house now retains it. And you can tour the house and see where Oswald was. And she says that she saw her daughter, when Oswald was there in those 8 weeks that he stayed there before the assassination, saw the two brothers, I guess they were her brothers, I don't have that right, wrestling and playing pretty hard in the yard, and that she saw Oswald saying, "You boys need to be careful. It's great to have a brother. Be kind to one another," etc., etc. And from that moment on, she never thought that Oswald could have been the killer. But that had happened just before the assassination, a couple of weeks before. Let's see where we are now. There's Oswald that has been captured, and he's coming in with the Marxist salute, the power salute to the police station. Let's see, how are we doing there, David? Okay, I'll tell you about the time. There's Oswald. Now, he was really, his character is something to really examine. He never had friends growing up in school. He was an outsider. Nobody liked him. He never could hold a job, not that he especially wanted to, I suppose, but he could never hold a job permanently. And his mother, Margaret Oswald, a very difficult person, everybody who knew her and ever worked with her thought difficult to work with. Her mother wanted to go to the Bronx, so they moved up to the Bronx from Texas. And there's Oswald, about 15, at the Bronx as a study. And at this age is when she left him alone. He would play hooky, not go to school. It didn't matter to her. She had a job, and it would last till 6 o'clock or so. He'd be there, have to fix his own meals and that sort of thing. Frequently wasn't enough food, he complained. But he started reading. He was a good reader. And he read about Marxism, what Marxism supposedly did for normal people. You know, everybody seemed to be equal, have food and all that sort of thing. And so he declared himself to be a Marxist at the age of 15. And he read all that Marxist material that he could. It wouldn't have been very sophisticated. It was very amateurish on his part to be a Marxist, but what the basic things he thought would be pretty good. They stayed, he underwent a couple of psychiatric exams while he was in school in the Bronx. And the teachers, those that he saw, wanted him examined, psychiatric examination. And he had one. And they declared him to be, you can read the material summarized in the book about his inability to get along with other people and all his problems, and the fact that he refused to tell them about his private dreams. And were any of them, did any of them contain vicious images or anything? And he said, that's not for you to know, I'm not talking about that. So probably he had some. But after about 2 years, they wanted to put him into the psychiatric unit. That's a little bit too harsh a word, I think. For him to be paired up with a father. I didn't tell you that his father died before he was born, so he never had a father. And they wanted him to have a pretend father and leave him there for maybe 2 months to give him this sort of treatment and show him how he should be acting. That his mother would have none of that. They came back to Texas and came to Fort Worth. There's Oswald. Now his brothers, his older brother, half-brother, had joined the Marines and had just gotten out of the Marines. Oswald, despite his Marxist beliefs, joined the Marines. And was in, he joined the Marines here for 4 years, I think. And he stayed in almost the entire time. He would get into debates with other Marines about Marxism. And he was reading a lot about foreign affairs then, and he would sometimes have officers come and talk to the enlisted people about some of the experience that I have as an enlisted person. And they would talk to you about the world scene in very minimal terms. And but Oswald, as a Marine, would sometimes approach these people and get into an argument with them and show, he thought, that he knew more about foreign affairs than they did. And he probably did, because he was really, these were just normal officers, who just were suddenly called upon to lecture to the enlisted men. But anyway, that's when he got out, that's when he went into the Marines. He got out of the Marines a few days before his enlistment was over, and that's when he went straight to the Soviet Union. And that's where he met Marina, and supposedly fell in love with her and brought her to the States. Now in this urge to be cooperative with the press, on the third floor of the police station, which I spent time on, this is when the press was pushing so hard for access to Oswald that the detectives there and the police were in control now, since he was in their custody. They said, okay, we'll have a press conference for you. It was a so-called midnight press conference, which you may have heard of if you read some of the material. And they said, but you gotta behave. You gotta, ask decent questions, stay away from him by 10 feet or something like that. So they held this midnight press conference in the patrol room, I think they called it. And within 5 minutes, the press had overrun Oswald, shouting questions one after another, and they immediately canceled the midnight press conference and took him back to his cell. a picture of Jim Lehrer. Many of you remember Jim, of course, as the daily reporter, night reporter for or host for PBS, for their news program. And he was a Times Herald reporter. So we wanted to have Jim in since he got so famous later on. And there's Henry Wade looking this way, the DA. And this is Jim with his notepad, the same kind of notepad that I have taken notes. He had a flat top then. And that's when the midnight press conference had been canceled. Now here's Marina on the right with her newborn baby, a month old, and Marguerite Oswald, who was Oswald's mother. Now, having a daughter, having two daughters myself, and now being a grandfather. Now, many months I had my own daughter, had a child, still does, and I can imagine at 1 month old how Marina, what difficulties she had in holding a 1 month old child while her husband's in jail, and she's trying to take care of the baby. And Marguerite's helping. Now there's a cell in which Oswald was kept. And they've redone the building now from the North Texas Law School, but they've maintained the cells. So you can still see the cells. And I was out there only a couple of months ago. That's the third floor is where all the detective offices were. And that's where I was stationed on Saturday. It was my turn to do the 5 midnight swing at the police station. And that's how it was crowded all the time. And there, I mentioned, early on I mentioned, and I put this in the book, that there was one of the reporters who was so brazen as to take his notebook and put it on the back of Chief Curry as a brace so he could take notes. And there's Chief Curry. And there's the notebook. Let's see, where's that guy? There's the notebook, and Curry's back. And so I was thrilled to have that made true for me, but I hadn't seen that picture. I'd seen the picture, but I didn't notice that it was on his notepad. Let's see. There's the backyard on White Street. Whitney, I think. So I forget the name of the street in Oak Cliff where Oswald and Marina had lived for a while. You can still go there today, and you can see that stairway, outside stairway. It was the upstairs part of the duplex. And that's where the picture was taken of Oswald with the weapons. You all see that. There's that stairway right there. There's Ruby, just after he shot Oswald. And the picture by Bob Jackson was made. Jackson's in town right now. Is Bob in here? No. I saw Bob right there at the 6th floor. And here's the thing. People try to put Ruby into this picture, the conspiracy picture. And but on that night, on the night before, the press, the visiting press especially, had been urging Curry to tell him what time Oswald would be transferred to the county jail, which would be more permanent than the temporary city jail. And finally, Curry didn't want to know. But finally he said, because these guys were terribly hungry, you can imagine, many of them were one person, a single person, covering this whole story. Well, they were looking for a confession. And you were thinking that a confession might come along at any time. So if any reporter is away from the 3rd floor, where the homicide office was, they might miss it at that instant. You know, they'd be an hour late getting back to the desk wherever their newspaper was. So they were hungry and tired. And they were begging Curry for a time the transfer to take place. Curry would not stay for a long time. Finally he said, okay, if you're here, and I heard him say these words, so I know sort of what was happening there, what was being desired. If you'll be here about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, nothing will have happened. So you can go ahead and go to your hotel room, get a meal, and if you're here at 10, you'll see good. He won't be transferred before 10 o'clock, so I would say. Well, when people try to put Ruby into this picture as a conspirator or involved in somehow, Ruby didn't show up at the police station until about 11:15. So if he had been involved in wanting to shoot Oswald, he would have been there at 10 o'clock for sure on Saturday morning. But he knew police officers, and he just wandered in at 11:15 or 11:10. And that's the instant that Oswald, an hour and 10 minutes later, that he was to be transferred, showed up with the detective Lavelle, handcuffed to him, and shot him, and there